Okay, hi everybody. I think we can give it a start, and while we wait for other people to join, and otherwise we might just run out of time. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rehana Rasool, and I am the Anti-Racism Advisor for IPPF. I've been in this role for a couple of years now, and so this is one of the key deliverables that we had for this year was to really start engaging with member associations from IPPF around the anti-racism program of action, as well as, bringing forward quite a few of the topics that that people have been asking for. So we have a presentation, so I'm going to share that. I think it's this one. Share. All right. So today's topic really will focus on the decolonization of research, challenging and reimagining what it could look like, actually. And part of the reason why this is one of the key pieces that we are focusing on in the session one is the fact that it is in our new 2028 strategy as one of the focuses for Pillar 3. And this decolonization of research requires quite a bit of thinking and understanding, and how do we unpack some of these pieces for the way forward for us. Research underpins so much of what we do in the sector, in sexual reproductive health and rights. And it's not just that we do the research, but it's also about the how we do the research. So what's coming up in today's discussion is we'll have a bit of opening, that's me, welcome remarks, and some of the key learning objectives. We'll have just an understanding of setting the scene and the theoretical framing of it. And I know that some of it, if you have questions, please do park them in the chat as we go along, as some of the concepts may be new to you. And if they are new and you want to know more about it, please park in the chat and we'll come back to your questions during the discussion time. We've got this understanding of situating the research and knowledge generation at IPPF. What does that look like? Who does the research? Why is it important? And then reimagining research from an equitable and decolonial perspective. So we'll give some insights into how we see coloniality and decoloniality, and how this can then be framed in an equitable way as well. And lastly, just some discussion feedback and what are some of the next steps for us. So maybe just to say welcome to you all. We're happy that you're here and we're glad you could make it for the session today. I know it takes up a bit of your time, but we are always grateful to have this engagement and to have community. So maybe what you could do, if you want to, is please park your name, anything about yourself, into the chat, and I'm sure we'd love to get to know more about you. We'll have a bit of time to have a little bit of introductions later on. After I'm finished with this introduction, I'm going to ask people if they want to put up their hand and say a bit about themselves and why they're here. But for now, maybe let me just give you a bit of context so that you understand what has been our roadmap also to unpacking this decolonial research and where does it come from, right? So just a little bit of background was that in 2020, we did an anti-racism review and a plan of action. The review was delivered to IPPF and it mostly focused on the Secretariat, but there was a piece of the review that focused on member associations and the different power dynamics that existed between the Secretariat and member associations. And then what happened in 2021 was, we set up an anti-racism working group as well as an anti-racism subcommittee of the Board of Trustees. I'm sure you all are aware and know about the Board of Trustees, and the working group for the Secretariat has mainly been working on initiatives that are to be delivered to the Secretariat, focusing on some of the key recommendations that had come out of the review. So for the Secretariat to also be able to introspect around what type of racism exists and how we can tackle that within the Secretariat. And then obviously in the lead up to the development of the 2023-2028 strategy, there were loads and loads of consultations. There was a background paper, and we had a roundtable discussion with member associations as well. And actually, I think in the business plan questionnaire, there was a question around anti-racism and decoloniality. So that then fed directly into the new strategy. And then at the General Assembly in 2022, the decolonizing research and the anti-racism piece was included into the new strategy. And there are these two, there's a plan of action, work plan, and then these two commitments that are specifically in there. At the 2022 General Assembly, a declaration of anti-racism was also made by IPPF, and that formed part of the commitment that we have going forward as well. So that's just a little bit of the overview. And then last year, every single regional forum had a dialogue, I think had a dialogue on anti-racism in their regional forum meeting. So that was a space where we got quite a bit of feedback from member associations, and how to recommend. And one of the key things that came out of that was that people wanted to know more about racism, anti-racism, colonialism, decoloniality, and how to input it into their own work. So, Nihal, I wasn't sure if this was you or me, this one.
Yeah, I can introduce this slide, but shall we do the introductions first, Rihanna? Does that make sense?
Let's do that. Then I'll come back. Let me stop sharing and I'll share once we do that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Great. So thanks everyone for coming. So maybe if anybody wants to put up their hand, we've got a couple of introductions in the chat over here. We've got Nihal. Okay, Nihal's one of the facilitators actually. We've got Shafu. How do I pronounce your name? From Niger. Okay, and hi Suchitra, thank you so much for making it. Appreciate it. Shafu?
Thanks, Rihanna.
Hello.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
I think I started to get more people. It would be good as well, as we introduce ourselves, a sort of bring ourselves into that space. I don't know if that makes sense in terms of what really, I would be very much interested to hear what brings you to the learning cohort, what interested you in this work. I think for me, that work touches both personal experiences and professional experiences in the sector. So and maybe just to go back, I'm Nihal Saeed. I work at the London office. I'm originally from Egypt, and I've been working in the sector for quite some time now, on different capacities, national level in Egypt and regional and so forth. So for me, that piece of work around decolonizing research and centering knowledge production and creation to have its power and value within the communities rather than to have it speak to the donors or the external partners is what really brings me to that space, both as I was trained as a researcher but also have been working in the sector, and I saw the impact of these things. I think we have a hand from Charles. Do you want to speak and introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Charles Odro Oreni, and I am in Ghana working with Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana, PPAG, the Sunyani site, that is the Sunyani site of PPAG. I've been with the PPAG since October 2022 and still counting. I am an active Rotarian and a primary health nurse, and I care much about the society to ensure that people will actively take charge of their reproductive health. And that is the reason why I aligned myself to be working with the PPAG. Currently in Sunyani, we are working with sisters, that is commercial sex workers, to help them take their reproductive health into their own hands by giving them access to information and also distributing condoms to them. Then this particular topic or this particular meeting will help me to better get information on how best we can serve the community, especially the vulnerables, including the commercial sex workers that we are currently working with in Sunyani here in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And yeah, very much welcome to have you here and contribute your perspectives. Anyone else that wants to go on mic and introduce themselves, tell them a little bit more about themselves and what brings them to that cohort session and that space? Shafu, please go ahead.
Bonjour, moi c'est Aboubakar Bizou Chafiou. Je suis le président national du mouvement d'action des jeunes de l'Association nigérienne pour le bien-être familial de l'IPPF du Niger. Donc, pourquoi j'ai décidé de m'engager et aussi de contribuer davantage? Vraiment, c'est parce que ici au Niger, nous sommes un pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, donc où nous avons différentes interprétations de la décolonisation, nous avons des idées nouvelles qui nous viennent de partout. Les gens n'ont pas la bonne information par rapport à tout ça. Donc, notre engagement peut contribuer à réduire les fausses informations, surtout sur la décolonisation, la santé de la reproduction et tout ce qui suit. Merci beaucoup. J'espère bien apprendre de tous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Aboubakar. But also to say there are, specifically in that space, there aren't a lot of right and wrong in that sense, but we are really here to share, but also to learn from you. So also just as a disclaimer, I myself am not an expert on these things. I just have some bit of knowledge that I want to share, but also as well want to hear from you and your own experiences and how these issues impact your own experiences. And I haven't really asked Tanya to introduce herself. If you want to do that, Tanya, that would be nice.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, ko maukatiri tau mauka, ko rakahuri ta awa, ko nai tahu nā te mutunga ki wharekauri o ku iwi, ko nai tua huriri ta hapu, ko Tania Huria ahau. So kia ora koutou everybody. I just did a brief introduction in Te Reo Māori, which is one of the official languages of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am an Indigenous person from the South Island, which is Te Waipounamu, which is very cold, and we're just coming into spring. And I have an interest. I work at the New Zealand at what used to be family planning, but now with sexual wellbeing Aotearoa. I'm the director of Hauora Māori and equity at the Aotearoa Sexual Wellbeing. But also in my previous life, I was an associate professor at a Māori Indigenous Health Institute at the University of Otago. So my area of interest is in decolonising research practices, but also in thinking about the translation of knowledge and how we cite and report research and the role that we have in that space as a decolonising tool, because research has been traditionally used as a tool of colonisation. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I met Rihanna at our regional meeting in Bali this time last year, which was, I'd only started a couple of weeks before that. So really excited to hear people's perspectives, to share people's knowledges, and yeah, just to really listen. So kia ora.
Thanks a lot, Tanya. Yeah, for me, I'm really grateful that I'm sharing this space with you. Yeah, really grateful to have you with us. Does anyone else want to go on off mute and just tell us a bit more about themselves and their interest in this topic? Okay, so I think we can get started for now, and please feel free to still write on the chat and pose questions and add more about yourself as we progress today. So in terms of the learning objectives for this session, is that we really want to critically analyze and look at some of the colonial legacies that we still see perpetuating the SRHR research and global health research in general. The second objective that we would be looking at today would be really around, Rihanna, can you? Yeah. Promoting sort of, reflexive and considerate practices for research. And that is based on some of the work that we have done in that background paper that Rihanna was referring to, the lead up to the strategy, development and some of other as well things that came out in this field. That has been really, there has been really a lot of work happening in this field most recently after COVID. And just collaboratively sort of reimagining ways that we can change how we do research and how we work in the sector that is more equitable, that speaks really to the values that we want to promote as IPPF, intersectional, being more feminist, being more vocal, and so forth. Then as we start sort of talking about these issues, we recognize that a lot of these terms could be a little bit jargony, but complex. And some of them do have specific sort of histories that are associated to those terms, or specific theories, be it from the different sort of theoretical background, be it the critical race theory or the intersectional feminist theory or other types of theories that do inform this kind of work. So we want to start just by introducing a couple of terms that could be relevant for this topic as we progress in the discussion, so that we can have some bit of a common understanding around these terms, but also as well to explain some of the specificities of those terms and specifically to research and to that whole idea around decolonizing research. So in terms of the definitions, Rihanna, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So some key definitions, and I put them just in that order, really, in terms of alphabetical order. So not that they have a consequential sort of relationship. And the first one that comes a lot in the literature around decolonizing research and research in the global health and addressing those issues is that whole issue around colonial gaze and foreign gaze. And the whole idea around it is that within colonialism, and that was a practice that has been done by the different colonial sort of powers, is that they always seek to maintain and legitimize power by determining what are the realities, who is worthy to be listened to, and who is the human and who is the sort of the lesser than human. And that whole separation of us, the colonizers, the civilized, and the other, which is the colonized, the savage. So we see that whole idea around sort of gaze, and that comes up a lot in the literature on research, in terms of how, for example, some researchers report on the research findings and trying to perpetuate that othering and associate specific populations, specific people from certain countries with sort of savage, uncivilized behavior, unhealthy sort of attitudes, that some illnesses are just attributed to people from this country just because they are from this country, that there isn't really that much of a scientific reason for why this illness and disease exists, and so forth. So that whole dehumanization and the othering is we see that a lot in the literature. The other term that we have is critical reflexivity, and that is specifically for researchers, is that it involves them questioning really their own assumptions and thinking and actions as it relates to engagement with others, and how their own understanding really of the world does impact the research that they do, and how they select the research questions, and also that whole issue around power dynamics that they perpetuate by who they are and their own background and attitudes about a specific issue, and how then that translates into the interactions that they have with the community or with local researchers for a specific topic. Decolonization, which is one of the overarching sort of themes for this learning cohort, is really a process through which we know that the colonial sort of power, the colonial rule in a lot of countries has ended a long time ago, but we know that this whole act of removing forces or no longer being sort of a dependent nation to another nation, that does not remove the effects of these many years of colonialism and oppression and perpetuating these ideas in specific societies. The other term as well that you find a lot in that literature is around epistemic injustice. And that is really around the whole idea that knowledge is related to power. And knowledge used to be one of those tools of the colonizers. And it used to be a tool to perpetuate more oppression and discrimination through the idea that some knowledge is deemed more superior than others, specifically in relation to the indigenous or traditional knowledge. And that some voices are more important than others, some voices are heard more than others, and some experiences are related to more than other experiences. And even I think in that town hall discussion that we had with David Alosogo, he was saying that even when it comes to pain, that some pain is deemed to be more felt and related to than other people's pain. The last term that we have that we just want to introduce you to is the whole idea around positionality. And that is also a research specific term, but also as well, it applies a lot to our sector. As we work in the sector and as we do research, we need to recognize that we have a lot of identifications and ways that we identify ourselves, be it across sort of national origin, race, orientation, gender, our own lived experiences. And these things, we need to recognize them and what do they bring to the research process, and not really not disclose them, because they do have an impact, but also as well, they do bring some more authenticity per se to the research when we recognize our own identity and location towards the topic, and be it the populations that we're trying to research and the communities that we're trying to do research with. So yeah, so those are some key terms from my side. Just yeah, I'll end here with a quick quote, just for you, Brianna, if you can move on to the next slide. And this quote really is from Eve Took and Wayne Yang. That was published in 2012, and they talk about decolonization, and that when we just give that the whole idea that decolonization really doesn't have a synonym, that and also as we try to decolonize, we need to move away from the traditional way of doing things, because the traditional way of doing things would co-opt what we're trying to do. So we cannot just do decolonization while still doing and working within the existing discourses. We need to find new ways to do the research and our work to be truly decolonizing in that sense. And also it speaks to the idea that some of those terms that I've just introduced, and maybe others that we'll introduce as we move on, they do speak to specific histories or specific topics, but we do recognize that theories do evolve, and that it's also how people deal with them and work with them that gives them meaning. And this is what we invite you really in that space, is like how do you give meaning to those things from your own context? And yeah, if you want to share that more with us, or try to incorporate that more in your work, that would be great. So yeah, so I'll hand it over to Tanya then to introduce us with some newer concepts as well. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks, Nihal. And I guess we have to be really mindful that we, you know, I mentioned before that research is a colonizing tool, and we need to recognize that, and we need to be upfront about that. And if we look at those definitions, it's all about actually unpacking the historical damage and trauma that has happened through research, because research has informed evidence, which has informed power, which has informed all sorts of decision-making practices. It informs policy, and we see the ongoing effects of that today. And I really just wanted to, so any research has a conceptual framework, and depending on what that looks like, it provides the scaffold for that research. And so there are many conceptual frames. You'll have your own conceptual frameworks for your research. But the key point I want to put in here is that, and this example that I've put on the slide is actually an example of an Indigenous adaptation of David Williams's model of, for everyone familiar with his model in 2013 of the root causes and understanding the root causes of health disparities. And so what some Indigenous researchers did is they took that conceptual frame, which we've been using for a very, very long time, and we indigenized it. So we included colonization in this framework. And you'll see also the other thing that we did was that the arrows go, or the researchers said from Auckland, the arrows go both ways. They don't go one way. It's not just one flow. It's going both ways. It's interrelated. And so this is a way that we can think about how we frame our research, what our conceptual framework looks like. And, you know, when we're thinking about those independent variables, the causative variables, are we including colonization and the impacts of colonization in that? Are we including power dynamics? Are we including political spectrum, depending on our context of where we are? And I think that's really quite relevant when we think globally on a global scale, how our political sort of leanings are leaning further right than they have done pre-COVID. And I guess another thing that we can think about, and just going back to COVID was an opportunity for us to, from a Aotearoa case study perspective, it was an opportunity for us to, for Māori to go, hey, we have our own solutions. So we're going to do it our way. And because the country was shut down and because they didn't have any options, they pretty much had to do it. So we forced them into this solution frame. Now, I don't think we're going to have that opportunity again, but what we can do is use the decolonising of research and the outing of the impacts of colonisation in every facet of our research to actually push that frame further. Yeah, do you want to go to the next slide? So the link's there for that paper, if you'd like that paper, and that was done by some academics at the University of Auckland. And it's a really great paper and a really great example of how we can decolonise our frameworks. So we'll go next slide. Is that there?
Rihanna, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Sorry, my computer got stuck.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. So,
Yeah. Do you want one at a time or do you want all?
yeah, all at once.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you. Yeah. Do we want to stop just quickly, just to check in with everyone if anyone has some questions, want to reflect on any of the things you've heard so far. Recognize that sometimes these topics are a little bit sort of theoretical. Okay, I guess we're all good so far. Okay, so thanks, Tanya. That was a really good way about sort of trying to shift really how we think about theoretical and conceptual frameworks, and not necessarily to work with them as just given, that we need to apply them as is, even though they may not speak to the realities, but really try to challenge those assumptions. Because a lot of times, specifically I feel in research, those are deep-rooted assumptions. Like there are specific models that, I don't know, it's like a socio-ecological model that people would not question really its relevance. Maybe it is comprehensive and everything, but just as you work with communities, you would really open up your eyes really to what are the gaps in these things.
Yeah, and I think that this leads really nicely into your slide, Nihal, is that actually for a long, long time, and it continues to be this way in many contexts, research is done on communities and not with communities. And unfortunately, the whole system of research is set up that way. So it privileges the few, and you've got a really great collection of what that looks like in this slide. And we have a saying here in New Zealand that with our kaupapa Māori research methodology, which I'll talk a little bit in a minute, is that actually we're taking that power back, and we no longer need that gaze. We no longer wish to have research done on us. We will actually do the research ourselves.
Thank you. That's amazing, really. So speaking to this sort of slide, we tried, so just trying to bring some sort of examples of colonial research practices, things that we want to change and we don't want to see happening at IPPF, hopefully, and specifically when member associations are involved. And some of those sort of points, we've collected them as part of that background research that we did a couple of years ago. We did some interviews with some member associations and some staff. And also some of it is really what what we know has been sort of written about in the literature, but we know that it has a lot of relevance to our experience on research within IPPF. The first thing is that top-down research agendas, that historically it has been really the case that the research topic and the research methodology has been determined by an external funder or a lot of times a university or an institution. And a lot of times this university or institution it comes from or based in the global north. And that the research topic is really around the specific topic in a country in the global majority world, or what we call sometimes the global south, without really ignoring the needs and priorities of the communities, or even consulting the communities around the relevance of that research topic. And that sort of hits us in a lot of ways from our experience as IPPF, both that member associations are local organizations in their own countries, so they're viewed as that local partner that usually would implement the research, but also they are the service delivery. We are in our DNA, we are a service delivery organization and not a research organization. So it's both that sort of marginalization that happens where the locals are being relegated as just to collect the data and not a lot have a say in the research topic, but also we're viewed as not that we don't have the research and capacity or the skills and capacity to do research. So we're being talked to, okay, this is how you do research, this is how you collect the data, without really consulting those in the member associations as knowledge producers, as key informants, and people that can contribute to the topic based on their own experience in providing services and dealing with the communities, and also as well their own lived realities. The second idea is really around how data collection is being viewed as an extractive exercise, and that whole idea that researchers would come in, collect the data from the communities, go back, analyze it, report on it, and then, I don't know, present it in conferences or publish papers without really acknowledging the local partners, but not necessarily that the research then benefits the communities, because the communities, after being part of a survey or a focus group discussion or something, they don't hear back about this research. The results are not really disseminated with the communities. So they don't really see the value of being part of a research project, other than just for them to give them information, give those researchers the information and their knowledge, and that's it. A lot of times as well, research by its design tends to marginalize indigenous knowledge systems, because it goes back to this whole idea which knowledge is considered to be more valuable and be more robust in the research world. And a lot of times the local and indigenous knowledge is not given that sort of standard in the Western and scientific ways of doing research and just of making sense of things. The other point is really around lack of long-term investment in local capacity building. So the research as well, and that speaks to the whole idea around research being extractive activity, that it just doesn't leave really infrastructure or resources or knowledge or capacity that is being capacity in the community to do the research themselves. It's being done by sort of international researchers per se. They go in, they do the research, they don't train the people on research methodologies. Maybe they only train them on the tools, how to use those tools, and make sure that people are responding to them as per the methodology. But there isn't really much being done beyond that to really build the capacity and contribute to existing and strengthening mechanisms to do research by the local organizations and the community themselves. So those are some of the things that we came across from that background paper. But I'll be happy to, if you know of more examples that you feel that you came across, or or that are missing, please feel free to share. I see there is a comment in the chat from Kikitsu. I don't know, Kikitsu, if you want to speak to that sort of question. How does decolonizing research influence data collection and analysis stages? So I can start, yeah, I can start responding to that, and also Tanya, please, yeah, contribute, yeah. Yeah, if you want to start, and then I can add if I have any.
I think what's really important is I think probably we all recognize these 4 different aspects that Nihal has just gone through, and in order to produce research that is a decolonized process, it needs to start right from the beginning. And so we need to rethink how we're engaging our community and our local population into the research process. And that has to happen right at the beginning. So that who prioritizes the research? Is it a priority for the community, or is it a priority for someone at university who has an interest in syphilis? So, you know, it has to happen there. And then when we're working in partnership alongside our communities, we're developing researchers within those communities. And when we get to the data collection and analysis stage, all of that reciprocity and relationship building has happened in the front end. And so when you're getting to the data collection and analysis stage, your lens has to be from that perspective, because otherwise we just run the risk of perpetuating stereotypes. And that's what's been done forever. And so if we're really going to change research structures, we have to honestly think, is the way that I'm analysing this data, or is the way that I'm collecting this data, will it perpetuate stereotypes? And if your answer is yes, is this research going to do more harm than good? If your answer is I'm not sure, then it's time to go back to your partners and go, you know, this is your narrative, this is your data, this isn't my data. And so that's the other thing, is that the power is in the hands of the population, not in the hands of the researcher.
Thanks a lot, Tanya. That is really sort of useful and critical questions really for us to always and constantly question ourselves, really. What are we doing this research for? And throughout the process, try to incorporate those things. Adebayo, do you want to add your point on mic, or because I see,
yes, let me do. Thanks very much for that. I've been around this for a while, and I know that most times in the donor world, research is used for managerial control, especially monitoring and evaluation, which is a critical aspect of our work. All our programs have monitoring and evaluation. And therefore, because the monitoring and evaluation frameworks and models are developed from outside to fit either fundraising, external communication processes, it then becomes skewed. One of the critics is that it becomes technocratic, and it is intended to look for efficiency, effectiveness, economy, and all those kinds of things, not directly related to actually the change that we are talking about. And then that really troubles us. And so in shifting, they will say, okay, you need to be more quantitative. And so they turn the research into more quantitative approaches. And when you do ethnography, you do complexity awareness and stuff like that. No, they say this is not hard science. This is the soft, smushy materials that we're generating. And so what Tanya is saying and what Nihal is saying, very important. In shifting the entire research agenda, it has to be from beginning to the end. And as we say in participatory work, it has to involve the community, the voices there. One last thing about capacity building that you said is that there is limited investment in capacity building. Also, we need to know that in terms of terminology, capacity building is changing because it shows that some people from somewhere have the skill to come and build the capacity of others. It doesn't recognize as much the assets that are there in those communities, the local knowledge that they are bringing and stuff like that. So these days we're asking people to shift from capacity building to bridging, or to just knowledge sharing and some of those other kinds of things. So it's a very interesting thing. It's going to take time for us to change it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adebayo. Really valuable. And yes, I totally agree on the capacity building terminology. It does perpetuate some of those things that we really want to change. So yeah, thank you so much. I see a hand up from Charles. You want to come in?
Yeah. So in my opinion, decolonizing research work will have a bit of impacts on data collection at the community, because it will enhance community involvement.
Charles, I think you cut off. I don't know if that
And
is...
give power density level, and also it will help the community members to own the data for decision making at the community level towards social change, or the change that we are expecting. So this is what I have to say in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. I think you did cut off a little bit for me. I don't know if others were experiencing the same. Do you want to repeat your point again, if that's okay?
That's okay. Yeah. Hello. So I was like, in my opinion, it will have better impact on data collection and analysis, because based involvement in the data collection and the analysis for them to own the data for decision making at the community towards change. And also it will kind of promote culturally approved methods for the work that we are doing, and also empower, also promote power dynamics at the community level. Then at the data analysis, the interpretation of the data will be improved at the community level for cultural understanding and social context that will shape the data. So that is what I was saying. And it will also give ownership and control to the community members when it comes to the data, for them to own it and use it for decision making, or for an informed decision making, right?
Thanks a lot, Charles. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and definitely what we want to promote more of. Just, yeah, responding quickly to your point and Rihanna's point in the chat, that also came up a lot in the findings from that background paper. That whole idea that data is power. So rather than just like us giving that power to the donors when we report to donor reports and complying with their standards, and what is considered to be the gold standard, but also how we can claim back that power. How can we ourselves make use of the data that we collect as IPPF and report on it ourselves in the way that we think is meaningful, but also to do that with the communities, and try to do more research with the communities, try to sense make of the data that we collect with the communities, so that we can try to both, reclaim that power and address those issues and those practices, harmful practices that we've been talking about. So so and then hand over to Tanya, please, to talk us more about reimagining and some research methodologies. Thank you.
Yeah, we can just keep rolling through, Rihanna. That would be great. Next one. So I just wanted to, oh, not that one. the following one. Yeah, that one. That's me. So I wanted to, and I just want to pick up on what we've been discussing, because the other side of research that we fail to explore enough is research that identifies privilege. And so when you are talking about disparities or inequities, you know, we're investigating disparities and inequities, and we do that constantly. But actually, we have an opportunity also to identify privilege and those in our communities that are privileged because of systems and structures. And so data and quantitative research has an amazing role to play in actually assisting us to call out privilege in communities. And there's a wonderful, I don't know if you have heard of her, but she is a professor in Tasmania, actually, in the University of Tasmania. Her name is Maggie Walters, and she wrote a book called Indigenizing Quantitative Methodologies. And her whole sort of thought process is around flipping the script. So, and that leads really nicely into our into the slide, which is talking about Indigenous research methodologies, which there are many, but today I'm going to talk about the one that I use, which is kaupapa Māori research methodologies. But flipping the script is about calling out privilege. And so from a reclamation standpoint, as opposed to a decolonizing standpoint, but from a reclamation standpoint, identifying privilege allows us to put the gaze back on our systems and structures that have created that privilege. And that is a big part of Indigenous research methodologies. So if you haven't heard of her, then I would recommend you do. I'll send a link to Nihao, and you can put it up in the chat, because it really is an amazing piece of work. So with Indigenous research methodologies, as I said before, there's many. Linda Smith wrote Decolonising Methodologies. I'm not sure if people have read that piece of work. It was a seminal piece of work that she did that has informed many, many Indigenous research methodologies across the world. She's done a lot of work in Canada, in Hawaii, and also in northern Scandinavian areas where the Sami people are. And it's a really amazing piece of work to help break down and understand that Indigenous knowledges are of value. And I guess that's what Indigenous research methodologies are all about. They're about validating Indigenous worldview within a research frame. And so with kaupapa Māori research methodology, it's about actually, there's no deficit framing at all, and it all comes from a strengths-based position and a solutions-based position. And I've just got, please share the names. Oh, yeah, I will. And so part of that is actually claiming back the space for Indigenous research work from Indigenous viewpoints. And I'll take us back to that definition slide. We won't have to do it, but in the definitions, there was one there that was epistemic. What was it? Nihao, epistemic something.
Epistemic injustice, or
Yep. And so there's a term that's related to that we were laughing about last night because we were being a bit geeky. It's called epistemicide. And so the act of epistemicide is actually the privileging of Western science, and is actually the whole structure of who privileges Western science and how that power is perpetuated. And that is epistemicide. And so one of the things that we can do to counteract that in our spaces, in our regional context, is actually starting to use Indigenous narratives, Indigenous voices, our communities' voices, community researchers, citing them in these spaces and places, and building up that network of knowledge as best practice. So there's lots of different things that are out there. You can do a Google search and find them. The one I've been involved with was the Consider statement, where we synthesized best practice guideline, research best practice guidelines for working with Indigenous peoples across several Indigenous nations, and came up with a set of 18 domains to help researchers plan their research. Because what I found was, when I was looking at research, and at the time I was looking at kidney disease, I didn't know if what I was reading was research that was done on a community or with a community, because no one reported it. So no one reported whether or not they had gained consent for future use of samples. No one reported that they were working alongside or it was a priority for that community. And so any research that I was reading in that space, I had no idea if it was research that was best practice and gold standard for our communities. And so that's where the consider statement has come out of. So it is a consolidated sort of criteria, as it indicates in its title, for that reporting. And so that criteria is now being used in the Australian New Zealand Journal of Public Health, where they must actually report and cite in their manuscripts that they have met criteria along those ways. Because reporting, if you think about it, people apply for ethics, but at the end of that research process, they never actually say that they did everything that they said that they were going to do. And so Indigenous methodologies actually call that out. We demand that people have the 5 R's of Indigenous research. So that's respect, relevance, responsibility, reciprocity, and relationship. And so those things are not negotiable. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about that?
Tanya, I
Yes.
want to ask, it's Rihanna.
Yes, Rihanna. Yeah.
I just want to ask about the issue of positionality. So I know that's going to come up somewhere, but I've been doing a bit of research, also just doing a scoping review, looking at the relationship of racism on the mental health of professional Black women and women of color. And almost all of the papers that came up were people stated their positionality, and they were like, I'm a person of color, I grew up in this community, etc., etc. And so that for me was really interesting, and I actually reported. I'm thinking of sort of reporting on it. Is that how many of these papers state their positionality, but a lot of papers don't. And of course, this is all new right now in the sense that we're discovering how positionality impacts on the research, and where you had people just sort of being parachuted in, do their research, and then go out, or they come in and they have what are called field workers, and those field workers have no power over the kinds of questions that are being asked, or how the data is then analyzed afterwards, etc., etc. So I guess the question is, like, the research that has come before, like, how do we interrogate that research now? Like, obviously there's a lot of research that we've seen even like decades ago where it was only done by white people on Black people, right? So, and that research is not being interrogated in this day and age. It's like almost like, okay, we're gonna work on stopping those practices, and this is the way that we move forward now. But that all that research is still problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
It's research's dirty secret, right? I mean, it's not so secret. And the more pressure we place on the Western science, academy, where it needs to, methodology, the better it will be. So when the Lancet came out and said, no more, we're not going to have any more of these shenanigans. You need to be up front and center about your positionality. You need to identify, that you no longer use the same samples that you collected in 1970 and never ask for permission to use them in future research. We will not publish research that does that anymore. And so, there there is a time and place in every movement where there's enough momentum for there to be a stand. Now, the historical impact of research, the more that we talk about those bad practices, the less citations that research is going to have, and it will eventually die. But the more we talk about best practice and the more we talk about valuing Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous viewpoints, and the more that we talk about actually looking at systemic structural impacts as opposed to trying to dig around thinking that it's got some sort of genetic disformity, the better it will be. Because research is its colonial gaze has been on individual health behaviours or individual pathological failures. That's the only explanation they have come up with, and it's flawed. And so we need that gaze to shift to systemic racism and privileging within that paradigm. And so the way that we can do that is demand positionality. People need to tell us who they are and where they're from and how they've worked with communities and what their experience is actually. Are they an experienced non-Indigenous worker working with an Indigenous community and that have identified them as someone that they'd like to work with? Or are they an inexperienced non-Indigenous health researcher that's doing it so they can get the tick for their PhD? So, those sorts of practices now are vital and tools in decolonising that research process.
Thank you. We've got a question there in the chat. Nihal translated Nerika's comment. I think that one of the ways we can combat racism is by overcoming self-prejudice, because we can often fight external factors, the discriminatory agents, but if the discriminated against or oppressed person doesn't accept their condition and learn not to see it as a problem, our intervention will continue to fail to have the desired effect. And although some peoples have gained their independence, there is a persistent colonization of the mind. The colonizer has left the land but continues to live in our minds, and we show traces of what was experienced. In short, apart from the external factors that favor racism, we need to design mechanisms to confront or overcome the internal ones in order to avoid greater disasters. Wow. Yeah.
And that's when we cross over into other systems and structures, right? So education, justice, media, political power, because internalized racism, which I think is what you're talking about, internalized racism is an outcome of systemic and interpersonal experiences of racism. It's when you no longer believe that who you are is of value. And that is a cumulative effect. And that can be intergenerational. And so we have to break down all of those structures that have led to that person thinking that they are of less worth because of who they are.
All right. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks,
we've got about 22 minutes left. So
I think we'll finish on time and have a space as well for people to reflect as we move with the content. But thank you so much as well to Nerika's point that colonization and decolonizing happens both at the mind, knowledge, and decolonizing of power. So there's also that colonial matrix of power that a lot of times we refer to in that work. I could put the links to those to sort of those readings, and that is quite known in that field. That and from the background paper as well, we heard a lot around sort of dehumanizing practices that happen in research, but also that barrier that some people feel to do research because they haven't been formally trained on doing research. They Also, they just view themselves as be it local organizations or advocates or service providers. So not a lot of times they feel that they have the skills to do research and publish and so forth, which we want to really try to address and try to work together on how we get our voices out there really in that academic publishing world that is very dominated by specific type of people and so forth. Great. So one of the approaches as well that we talk about when it comes to decolonizing research and shifting the ways of how we do research is following intersectional feminist approaches. And within sort of intersectionality is this whole idea that there are many layers really to one's sort of identity and personality. And those layers, it could be sort of internal, how you identify them yourself. It could be external to where you come from, your income, habits, and norms that are being sort of accepted in the community, to more sort of structural and organizational in terms of where you work and sort of issues around the community, around the seniority and who has power within the community and so forth. So so that is, we want to invite you to do some bit of a reflection exercise with us so that we can make this topic sort of closer to you rather than just speaking to it really. Is that we have a couple of reflection questions and we would invite you, Rihanna, if we can go to the next slide, that's okay. Is that we have a couple of questions that we want you, so yeah, this slide, that we want you to think about and either, I don't know, write it on a piece of paper, share it with us on the chat. You're also more than welcome to interact on the chat group on the MA forum. I've seen that some of you have already started interacting there, so we can continue the conversation. But it's really, how do we reimagine sort of our standpoints in SRHR research from a decolonial and intersectional feminist lens. So yeah, if you want to reflect more about your own identity and location as researchers, as people that contribute to knowledge, to the knowledge production process and to knowledge within the sector, in your own community, in your own country, what assumptions you have about power, when it comes to selecting topics that are usually researched in the community, who decides on the research topic? Is that being influenced by a specific donor, or on the other hand, that is influenced by specific needs by the community? What relationships you've had with researchers when you interacted with them? Did you feel that those were equitable sort of relationships? You've talked to them as peers, or you felt that there's this hierarchy between yourself and the researcher? Have you tried to really center the community in the research? That was very much influenced by Kukitsu's comment, I think, on the MA forum chat. Is like, how do we really try to center the community in research and not center ourselves in the research? And do you feel that, yeah, just the research, is it really being influenced by what's dominant, what is considered to be best practice, what have others called like the gold standard in research, or what really is more meaningful to the community and makes sense in terms of methodologies? So yeah, so I'll give you around a couple of minutes just to reflect on those questions, and then feel free to share on the chat. If we can stay on this slide for a couple of moments. Thanks, Rihanna.
I'm trying to put it in the chat also.
Yes, that would be great. Thanks, Rihanna. Thank you, Tanya, for sharing the resources. That's really helpful. Does anyone have any reflections to share, or should we give it to another minute? Anyone has any reflections to share with us on these questions? I don't know. I don't want to put people on the spot, but maybe can we start with you? Just because I was really intrigued about your comment on the NA forum, that whole idea around, yeah, like how do we do this while centering the communities and not centering ourselves in the research process? But yeah, if you don't feel like sharing, that's absolutely fine.
Hel, can I?
Yeah, please go ahead, Adebayo.
Yes, the whole issue of centering ourselves and centering the community is complex, because most times we go to the community with a research agenda, with a research focus, with a research objective, with what we want and who we want it for. Therefore, most times when we get to the community, we just go to implement. Therefore, until we change almost like the entire paradigm, where we're starting with the people, where they are they becoming front and center in the entire process, it's going to be very difficult. However, I think as we're shifting the perspectives within the aid structure, and I don't even like that word aid anyway, but as we're trying to shift the entire process, I think it will make us more conscious and aware of some of these biases, presumptions, and worldviews, and we will start with them. That is one. Two, I think the communities themselves need to be much more stronger in how they engage with us, so that it doesn't become, we're using them, to achieve our overall agenda. I think that will be my issue around positionality, whether it's the research center or the community center.
Thanks, Adebayo. Yes, that's really useful. And I do hear you and agree with you that the whole structure really needs to shift and needs to change. And that includes as well research. So decolonizing research cannot be a standalone sort of piece. It has to fit in with decolonizing the whole sort of global health sector or development sector and so forth. Any more thoughts on this point, or any of the other questions? Kafu, Abu Bakr, please go ahead.
Oh,
um,
j'avais... Oui, c'est
oui,
bon, vous me recevez. C'est bon?
oui, Abubakar.
Ok. Merci beaucoup pour les échanges. Nous avons vu, c'est très enrichissant. Euh, par rapport, quand vous avez parlé de l'influence de nos recherches par des voix dominantes, je dirais bien sûr que oui. Parce que, vous savez, nos communautés sont en quelque sorte conservatrices et et il y a beaucoup d'impact par rapport à la tradition. Nous avons les leaders religieux, les chefs traditionnels qui ils ont, ils, ils sont conservateurs au fait. Quand vous abordez ces genres de sujets, ça impacte directement parce que ils se sont ralliés de notre côté ou ils sont carrément contre les questions en lien avec dès que tu parles de sexualité du moins, et ils voient ça du côté négatif. Et c'est ça qui impacte beaucoup sur, par exemple, les interventions, tout ce qui est question de recherche. Les gens sont réticents à donner leur avis, à échanger comme il le faut sur ces sujets-là. Mais pour que nous puissions vraiment arriver à avoir un cadre idéal, pour que nous puissions arriver à créer des cadres d'échange où les gens n'auront pas du mal à dire ce qu'ils veulent. Il faut encourager les discussions à faire. Je pense que c'est la meilleure approche possible pour pouvoir recueillir des informations justes et, comment dire, et de recueillir la bonne information. Et aussi par rapport l'influence de l'emplacement, comme je l'avais dit, si on se réfère à tout ce que j'avais dit, l'emplacement influence beaucoup. Parce que toi-même, tu t'es dit, quand tu parles, par exemple, des fois, celui qui est en face de toi va te juger. Vous voyez, c'est ce genre de réflexion qui amène même les acteurs à ne pas donner ou bien poser les bonnes questions pour pouvoir recueillir des informations justes qui peuvent permettre d'avoir des résultats exacts. Donc, en quelque sorte, c'est tout ce que je voudrais dire par rapport à l'influence et aussi aux voix dominantes qui influencent nos recherches. Merci.
yeah, that's a great point. Abubakar, definitely around some addressing this tension around community values that we may think that they would not accept this research idea and or would feel comfortable to talk about it, but also as well trying to do the research in a way that both responds to the community's concerns, fears, but also tries to expose more those ideas. And we know definitely doing research on sexual and reproductive health issues, on comprehensive sexuality education, on abortion, on LGBTQI and HIV/AIDS and so forth. These are a lot of topics that have a lot of stigma associated with them. And of course, we could sort of face a lot of pushback when doing research about these things. But it's that whole idea around how do we work together with the community to frame it in a way that is that speaks to sometimes it could be that speaks to their fears from talking about these things, and try to get to the main issues really in relation to these topics, in a way that is that would have the community really engaged. And I remember really when we were doing the session with Amy in Vanuatu, they were telling us that, yeah, so some of the research when they do it on comprehensive sexuality education, the community, they know that they would not accept this this term. So pushing harder on the term not necessarily yields the best results. But if they frame it in a something that is a little bit palatable, be it life skills and so forth, but still keep the main issues, that gets a little bit of more traction and a little bit of more engagement from the community. And I see Kutitso's comments. Our cultural background, race, gender, and socioeconomic status and lived experiences does shape our worldview. For example, if researchers from dominant cultural academic backgrounds might unconsciously prioritize certain forms of knowledge while marginalizing others. Totally agree. And we heard about that as well from the background paper, that in some instances, the researcher would come in with a specific topic, be it, for example, on abortion, when there's no really acceptance to that topic in the community. But they still insisted on collecting the data without really working with the community around framing the research in a way that is more acceptable to the community to be part of that research. So those are definitely one of the things that we try to address and make sure that we promote more, working with the community to frame the research and the methodologies of data collection and so forth. Rihanna, I think you put in a link. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got about 4 minutes left, so I just want us to try and start wrapping up maybe. And so I think that for me, a point to make is also around confidence for people who sometimes who can't always stand up and say, hey, so calling out and accountability is important. Being able to call out racism or colonialism in the methodologies of researchers, because we will walk that fine line of, of having to have a livelihood and then still but also having to compromise on how research is done sometimes. So we have to all take that into account. And if there's any good sort of recommendations around that, I've just put in the chat and people can go and have a look and do a bit of research. And I'm sure some of you know about it. Is about Henrietta Lacks and the Lacks cells. So she was a Black woman in America, African-American woman in America, and a doctor took some of her blood and her cells, and they're still using those cells to this day. And nobody ever asked her permission. Nobody ever asked for her family's permission, etc. And she was never credited in any way, shape, or form. And so, that kind of thing obviously happens over and over and over again, especially on the bodies of Black women and women of color. So it's just to take into account these things. Is if sometimes you are the standpoint there. Thank you. Now, few. Oh, your sound is not very good, sir. I don't know if he's talking to us. All right, Nihal, over to you to wrap up.
Yeah, just quickly, maybe based on the recommendations from that work, is that we really need to do more, and we're really happy that this group is very much engaged and interested in this topic. Within IPPF, we really want to create that movement where we try to work together on having more feminist and intersectional research and approaches that would inform our work and our research, to have the research be more responsive to the community.
Sorry, Nihal, can you unmute?
I thought that I unmuted myself, but then, yeah.
Okay, no worries. Carry on.
Sorry. Yeah. So, I was just, trying to wrap up with some of the recommendations that we had from that research and that engagement with member associations, is that within the IPPF, strategy. We want to do more around decolonizing our ways of working and our research to use more reproductive justice, intersectional feminist, and other approaches to really inform our work and research, to have research that is responsive to the community's needs, to have long-term relationships with partners and the member associations, to center them in those partnerships and to give them due credit and ownership of the partnerships in research, to recognize as well the intersecting forms of oppression that usually happens in research, to do research in a way that does not always prioritize and give sort of higher value to global north knowledge, but on the other hand, try to promote the authorship of the global south and also the citation and so forth to researchers from the global south, and language and practices that does resonate more with people in the global south, to use methodologies that are contextually and culturally relevant. So not always the quantitative methodologies are the answer, but to use other methodologies that try to address those power issues when it comes to research. And within the partnership agreements is that we are always stressing on having formal partnership agreements with partners when we do research. And these partnership agreements have clear sort of clauses and obligations when it comes to intellectual property rights, when it comes to the local ownership of the data, that it always sits with the member association or the partner that is collecting the data, that authorship is shared, and the acknowledgements are always due. And that is something that we keep on promoting more and more. And we're happy to provide support when needed to ensure that these things are happening. So this is really from my side. I don't know, Tanya, if you want to do some closing from your side, but thank you.
Oh no, just kia ora. Kia ora. Thank you for having me along. I've really enjoyed the conversations, and particularly reading the comments in the chat. So kia ora.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nihal and Tanya, and thanks to everybody for coming today. We're going to call it an end here, and we will wrap up with the recording. It will go onto the MA Forum. Please go to the social media page on the MA Forum to park your engagement or any discussion or any chat that you want to about it. We look forward to reading your comments, and we are reading your comments. The next session will be on decolonization of programming, and it will be on the 26th of September, and it will happen in the afternoon BST. So it'll probably be around 1 o'clock British Summer Time. So that gives the other side of the code an opportunity. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. We appreciate you all and your time, and have a brilliant day further. Thank you.
Thank you for thanking us.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Thanks, Nafiu. Lionel.
Thank you.
Dr. Getira, thank you for coming. Thanks, Puya. Thanks, Keketso. Aisha. Magdalene.